godson Elijah and a little girl named Corinne.
Man, you coming at me for my music, but you listen to this old stuff.
Old stuff? What? You better get up out of here with all that. Pocket's the truth.
Well, I got a boyfriend.
Yeah, I heard, but it's all good.
Really?
We've been together our whole lives, Starr. We got time.
My name is Starr. 2 R's. Daddy named me that. Garden Heights. Mama and Daddy says our life is here, because our people are here. We got Mr. Rubin's barbecue, Mr. Lewis's barbershop, and Daddy's store. The high school is where you go to get jumped, high, or pregnant. We don't go there. Williamson is another world, so when I'm here, I'm Starr version 2.
Yo, those kicks are lit.
Basically, Williamson Starr doesn't give anyone a reason to call her ghetto, and I hate myself for doing it. Until the weekend comes around.
I get those goosebumps every time.
What's up? Where you been at?
Man, I don't know. You be hanging with all the white kids.
Shut up.
Yeah, when you not around, when you throw that to the side.
Out of the car.
Yo, Starr, you okay?
Go back where he told you. Khalil, I'm not playing. Go back where... What did you do?
Today, Garden Heights is reeling after the shooting of a 17-year-old black teenager by a white police officer.
We live in a complicated world.
It doesn't seem that complicated to me.
Violence, brutality. It's the same story, just a different name.
When I attack with impact, it's real tactful. The black cat waited and sat, debated.
It's best if she don't talk to father.
With a passion, while seeking.
He was threatening her.
The only true power is the power within the people.
It's about more than just Khalil. It's about black people, poor people, everybody at the bottom. I need to speak for him.
You to think we could never achieve the inconceivable. We don't belong, but we here unbelievable.
When you're ready to talk, you talk. I'm not gonna let nobody make you be quiet.
Anybody up here for a photo? Just move on. Are we going off? Probably not.
The youngest candidate, hard spoken for
Campaign trail. The clear.
Okay, thanks guys. Thank you very much.
Oh. Hello, Miss Carpenter. How are you? Oh, hey.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You left a good job in the city?
Great.
Feeling good.
Great. Good morning.
We're not familiar. We're here with the cast of The Hate U Give. Had an opportunity to really take in this film and internalize it over the past 2 days, and it was a very emotional experience for me as a black woman coming from a marginalized community from Toronto. I've never seen a film that so succinctly, accurately captures the racism and the severity of police brutality that we're currently facing today. So thank you, all of you, for the work that you put into this film. And what do you each kind of personally hope that this film accomplishes? I'll start with you, George.
Well, we always talked about, as a cast and just talking with the studio, we always just felt like we wanted to be as honest as possible, confront all the issues, don't hold anything back, and be authentic to Angie Thomas' book. Hopefully the ideal is to inspire, but create dialogue, almost like Starr and her relationship with Chris and her relationship, you know, with a lot of her friends at Williamson, a lot of her friends in Garden Heights. A lot of that is just to create conversations and be able to look at these issues and talk. And by doing that, you can be able to change the future possibly. So that was a lot of our goals when we had a lot of these conversations early on.
Did anyone else feel the same as far as like how they, you know, wanted the film to reach other people? You, Amanda?
Yeah, you know, I think Starr is a refreshing character because she is really multidimensional and she's really black, and we don't often get both of those qualities in on-screen narratives. Oftentimes, I think the characters that we get to play fall into certain tropes or categories or just simplifications. But Angie wrote an amazing book that, with a lot of depth and a lot of heart, explores what the contemporary black experience is. And so our main goal was just to capture that and bring that forth in the film. And hopefully what it does is it makes black people, black girls, feel validated, feel empowered, feel strong, and stand in their power and their truth. And also hopefully what it does is it brings some light to these events, and because it evokes empathy in people, hopefully we're able to have real dialogue about it from a real place, instead of just understanding these events in a topical manner and sometimes a desensitive manner.
Oh, totally. Well, I'm going to jump right into it. I have some sassy questions for you.
Sassy. I love that.
Sassy. So in the film, when our good friend Haley unfollowed Starr on Tumblr, this was a really loud moment for me. It triggered an important and very typical moment that we see in online and more importantly, like racialized bullying. George, I want to ask you, like, why was it important to touch on this theme in the film?
I think it was very important. It was something that Angie had in the book. And when we started our rehearsals very early on with Sabrina and Amanda, and we just felt like it was a really important thing. First of all, I felt like I haven't seen that scene in the movie before.
1,000,000%.
Yeah, so I felt like, wow, we on the right path. Yes. And I really feel like audience wants to see things different and be honest. But how does that make Haley feel? You know, what is her journey in terms of change? And how do Starr voice begin to speak up? All that was a clash. It was about to start clashing. It was to start the beginning. And I just felt like in my experience, sometimes people outside the culture, or even myself, is when you see things that you're not familiar with, sometimes you run away. And Haley takes that in, and eventually she learns that. But I felt like we didn't want to run away from that. So that was conversations that Sabrina and I had very early on, and she was able to really take that and humanize that, which I really love.
I love the line that Starr says to Haley, which is, you don't have to use a fire hose or the N-word to be racist. Exactly. And I feel like that's something that this film explores, is what does racism look like in today's day and age? How does it manifest? And oftentimes it shows up as microaggressions, and those microaggressions come out and they demonstrate a lot of prejudice and internalized notions about blackness. And so that was, I think, the intention with the character of Haley, both in the book and translating that to the screen, is to demonstrate that racism can exist in so many different forms and rear its ugly head in a lot of different ways. And oftentimes people are not aware of the ways in which they are being racist or prejudiced, because they are microaggressions, not as blatant as how we usually conceptualize racism, but they still hurt, and it's something that we as black people navigate every single day.
Exactly, especially when you're younger and maybe perhaps, like, you know, being a little bit older, you might not necessarily be privy to the online world in the slightest. So you might not even know, like, how people could be, like, displaying these microaggressions to you. So I completely get it. I want to move on to the I don't see color conversation. Because this is something that I've heard from many white people in the past, particularly white hippies with locks, particularly. Do you feel, particularly, do you feel that this is a passive-aggressive statement? And, what would be a more appropriate response?
I mean, I feel like the notion that, I don't see color, it relies upon the idea that we live in a post-racial society, which we don't. Exactly. We do not. Sorry to break it to you, white hippies with locks. But we don't. And so I think that's indicative of a sort of privilege. If you are able to think of the world as existing as post-racial, you're obviously ignorant to the realities that Black people and Black communities are facing every day. So I guess a better alternative would be, I don't let internalized notions or stereotypes around race affect how I view you. Right. That would be a better way, I think, of thinking about it, instead of I don't see color, because you can't disregard the experience of being a person of color. It's the entire lens through which
you don't see me.
We like,
see
color. Exactly.
Just,
You don't see my blackness. You don't see me.
Exactly. I love it. You don't see my blackness. You don't see me. Starr had already witnessed a murder at, was she 10? I think, but was still conscious enough to know that she didn't want to die at such a young age, so she, refrained from snitching. Do you feel that Black folk from marginalized communities are in a perpetual mental state of survival mode? Did anybody want to take this?
Absolutely.
Yes.
I know that for me, coming from the neighborhood that I came from, snitching was a survival tactic. Not snitching was a survival tactic. Yes. And it would frustrate us because so often it felt as if, so often law enforcement would say, well, no snitching is a code, that's gangs, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of times they operate in the same manner. They don't call each other out on things. So how can you expect us to not snitch or to snitch when you won't snitch on each other? Right. And I don't think people understand that in circumstances like this, in communities like mine, if someone was to snitch, they're not going to get protection. Exactly. They're going to be on their own, and then they're going to end up dead. Yeah. So it's a survival tactic. But I was recently at a school, and a young man was having a conversation with me about it, and he was like, I couldn't snitch like in the book, Devontae snitch. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. That's the blah, blah, blah. I said, but do you consider what Starr did snitching? And he went, huh. And he had this moment, and I said, it's about speaking up and speaking out, but I get it. It's hard, it's scary, but I hope that we can get to the point, even in communities like mine, where young people feel as if they can speak up and speak out in a safe manner. Yes. So until we can get to the point where it's safe to snitch, don't criticize people for not snitching.
1,000,000%. When is it ever appropriate to snitch? What do you think, Angie? I mean,
you're trying to get me in trouble.
Maybe we should change the word from snitching to something else, but like.
I think it's about using your voice, and it's about speaking up. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's more about that than anything. I wish we could get rid of the term snitching, if I'm perfectly honest.
Yeah.
I really do. I wish we could get away from that. But I think in a circumstance like Starr's, it's important to snitch.
Agreed.
It's important to speak up and speak out, especially in instances of injustice. We have to.
Yes. Oh, I really appreciated that answer and this film. I don't really think that Starr really got an opportunity or a chance to really process her traumas. Like after the shooting, she went straight home, vomited, had some bacon, and was at school the next day. And this is like a normalcy for a lot of people, particularly Black people that have experienced, racialized brutality or police brutality. There's no time to process or mourn or, even like take a moment to breathe. What can we do to encourage victim support services or therapy for recovering Black folks so that we can live healthier and fuller lives?
We have to first remove the stigma around mental illness. You know, so often we don't talk about it in the Black community. So often we don't talk about the fact that so many of us are suffering from PTSD.
1,000,000%.
And that's one thing I actually regret that I didn't address in the book enough, because Starr does suffer from PTSD.
She does.
And I would hope that she would seek help beyond the page, you know. So I think the first step is removing that stigma.
I love it. KJ and Samantha, and good friend, or Sabrina, sorry, darling. How did it feel to be the minorities in this film? And were there any moments where you ever had to like personally unpack?
Yeah, it was awesome, you know, under the circumstances that I was in coming into this film. I felt very, I felt like everyone, you know, I was in an environment, a very loving environment. Everyone wanted me to succeed. So, you know, I was a little intimidated to begin with, for sure, but I was immediately, you know, I fell into it. I fell into the puzzle perfectly. But yeah, I could relate a lot to the character. You know, being from New Zealand, it's a little different to the States, for sure. Like, I definitely learned a lot about what's going on in the States. And yeah, for someone like Chris, who is automatically born into privilege, it's hard for someone like him to truly understand the depths of struggle that minorities experience. Right. And what I probably learned most from the character is that you will never know what it's like. I will never know what it's like. As long as my skin is white, I'll never know what it's like to be black. And I think that's also what Chris learned towards the end.
What about you, Serena?
George said something earlier that, like, when I first read the book, which I read before the script, I fell in love with the book, and I could only play one character in the movie. So going into it, it was one of those things where I had to question, like, there's a reason that she's friends with Starr, and there's a reason that Starr likes her, and there's a reason that, you know, in the first place they have a relationship. But she's such a pivotal part in Starr finding her voice, because a huge part about finding your voice is realizing that some people don't belong in your narrative and in your story, and some people aren't going to understand what you're going through. And I think Haley is the perfect example of white privilege. She grew up in an environment, and I had to question a lot of the times, like, why is she saying the things that she's saying? And because we worked on so many things of, like, getting into the headspace of, like, Haley loved control. She loved control over her friends, especially Starr. And when she saw that Starr was developing her own identity, that scared her, because she lost power. Right. And it's this weird thing where you would think, like, why does she even care about power? She's in why does she care? But for some reason, she's so ignorant to what she's doing when she goes home from school. Right. You don't even see that. Like, Haley doesn't ask her about that kind of stuff. And so it was such a learning experience for me the entire time, the entire process. But more than anything, like, it opened my eyes even more to what we've been facing. And I think that's why during filming it was so real for all of us. I said this, like, yesterday. I realized it's been a year since we filmed this movie, and the story's still relevant. I know. And it says a lot about why we needed to make it, I think.
It's way more relevant than probably when you started.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is unfortunate. So Russell and Regina, you're the parents of beautiful Starr, and I loved the roles that you guys played, and you know, the fact that you guys just really had to stick together, and you also didn't have time to take in your traumas. You still had to keep this momentum going of, like, we gotta go to school, we gotta continue working, and this perpetual idea that there's never time to process. You know, can you familiarize with your characters?
Yeah, I mean, you know, these people really, the characters in this film and in the book really spoke to me. You know, I know who they are. I grew up with them, I was raised by them. You know, I grew up in a single-parent household, and oftentimes remember my mother, you know, paying bills, you know, once a month and sitting down with the checkbook and coming to tears, you know, because the checkbook didn't balance. You know what I mean? Yeah. And being upstairs and hearing her weep, and what she would say if not month after month, every other month would say, I'm tired.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And you realize that these families, these parents, these spouses, they're tired, they're exhausted, but they have no choice but to deal with the hard times day after day. They have to be resilient. And that's why we have so much character. That's why we have so much inner strength, is because of what we're forced to do. But the beauty of it, what my mother didn't have, and what Lisa and Matt have, is they have each other. Yeah. And I think the beauty in what this film represents and what it shows is that there is black love. It does exist. There is a mutual respect amongst husbands and wives, you know what I mean, that are black, and that they love each other, that they love their children, and they will do what they need to do and make a way for them. And you realize very early on, when you choose to have children and you realize the surroundings that you're in, is that it is about keeping them safe, keeping them understanding and growing in who they are, but also continuing to make them whole. Because the thing is, we are, in our lives, we are fractured. Right. Mav and Lisa, because of what they've been through. You're trying to hope as long as you can to keep them whole. And unfortunately, in black life, that doesn't happen. You know what I mean? And so the issue that you deal with is that you realize, wow, my daughter has to be an adult now at 16. And you're hoping, you're trying as much as you can to keep her from that. And it hurts to say, I have to usher her now into the world at 16. Yeah. Where white families, dominant culture, they don't have to do that. Exactly. And that's constantly what we have to do. And it's moments like that creates the fatigue. Right. You know what I mean? And the constant pain within us, because we have to raise our black children to be adults at a young age.
Yeah, it's like the scene where you walked into, I guess like it was around the time when you were about to go to the funeral, and you walked in and you were just kind of like, yeah, your two friends are now gone, just casually. Yes. And I'm just like, okay, Dad, like, but this is the reality, and this is the role that you've played, and you've made it very clear to her that life is extraordinarily real, and that you're not going to sugarcoat anything, and you're just going to lay it out straight, no chaser.
But the other thing is that the beautiful thing that's in the book, and that George illustrates so beautifully, is that now, at 9, Sacani has to come in and hear that too, even younger. Right. So Starr's getting that other talk at 16, but now Sacani comes in at 9, and he has to get that talk even younger. So I've already had to talk about the police, right? But now I have to let him know that you're a different kind of target. You're going to be, on that conveyor belt to go to jail, and they're going to be ready for you at 12, 13, 14 years old. And he has to get that at 9. Yeah. How painful is that?
It's so deep. Anthony, your role was powerful because you, I guess being Starr's, well, you're not even Starr's uncle. You're actually Russell's friend, and or former boss.
Yeah, but she said
I've known you like 20 years. Are we friends?
Former boss.
Russell ain't friends with King. I'm friends with Anthony.
All right. That's all I'm looking for.
Friend. Okay. Well, I don't know what kind of friend, but you know what I'm saying. Like, I can't deal. But I thought your role was so interesting because you were a manipulator as far as like being in the car talking to Starr. Do you feel like you were more concerned about your position than keeping her safe?
Not at all. I feel like, just like what Russell was saying, when Maverick has to have those conversations with his kids, King has to have those conversations too. Because he can keep her safe in the house. I have to keep her safe in the streets.
Right.
And that's what a lot of people, I feel, miss. King wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't a villain. He was doing what he thought was right. You know, so him talking to Starr and saying, look, shut your mouth, because that's all well and good when you're on the news or when you're in your house, but you got to make it from home to school. You know, and that goes back, you know, to what we were talking about earlier. There is no safe haven. You know, there is no, you know, witness protection for people who talk out about what happens in the neighborhoods. I feel like as a community, as a people, as men, our job is to protect women and children. Right. And in this generation, we have failed miserably. So until we do our job, the idea of speaking out against what's happening in our community is practically impossible because there's no one to protect you.
Another theme that's huge in this film is code switching, which I'm very familiar with. Well, not even myself, but my mom being a Jamaican mom, like, I mean, it was casual when she was cussing us out, and then she'd, you know, pick up the phone for a bill collector and be like, hello? Hello. You know, that was normal. But Starr was comfortable in living like a double, even a triple life. And yeah, like she went from being, you know, a quiet and passive young girl at school almost to an activist overnight, which, you know, we can kind of see in Erica Garner, who recently passed. You know, what do you think would happen if more Black people were able to be their wholer and fuller selves?
Ooh. Man, what would happen? I think that we would have if we were able to be our full selves. Well, I mean, it starts with healing, you know? I think it starts with healing, and I think Starr is pushed towards having to heal after this traumatic event, the disparate parts of herself. She has to confront the fact that she has compartmentalized herself, that she hasn't allowed herself to exist authentically and fully in the world, because this event catalyzes that. And when she does that healing, the result is that she finds her authentic voice, and she becomes so much less afraid to use it because she doesn't feel apologetic about using it. So I guess the result of that is finding your voice and your strength and your power, and deciding, making the conscious decision not to walk into the world already apologizing. Right. Because that's what Starr does in her school, you know. When you see her at the beginning of the film, she walks into that environment already apologetic for who she is. But you get to see her come to a place where she no longer does that. Yeah.
And Thug Life, which I was already familiar with, the hate you give little infants F's everybody. Was everyone privy to the Tupac record prior to the filming, and does everyone actually agree with this statement?
Obviously, I was.
Yeah, I definitely was. I was raised on Tupac from a lot of my aunties and my uncles, so it resonated with me even when I went into the first initial audition with George. But I definitely agree. I agree that whatever and this goes for anybody, whether you're Black, white, whatever race you are, whatever seeds are planted into your life when you're younger, that's what you grow up with, even if it's subconscious. So the decisions that you make are coming from those seeds. So it's whether you're in an environment like Khalil or whether you're even in an environment like Starr, whatever's being fed to you, that's what's gonna come out in the end. So I definitely agree with the phrase.
Everybody else agrees?
Yeah.
And is everybody else a fan of Tupac over Biggie? Is that what's happening?
We're not about to have that conversation.
Are we gonna have that?
Hey, look.
No.
Hey, we
The
can,
director of Notorious right here.
I don't know.
That's not up for discussion.
Hey, listen.
Now in Canada, like, we have free healthcare, which is, you know, I mean,
You also have less
moving
than 30
tomorrow.
million
I'm
people.
just saying. You know, I don't look healthy for nothing. But in the movie, Khalil's grandmother was suffering from cancer, which I think was a catalyst for him selling drugs in the first place. You know, at this point, do you think that a free healthcare option in the U.S. would assist in lower drug-related crime in America?
No.
You don't think so?
The biggest thing in America is not health care. The biggest thing in America, like any country, is job creation.
Right.
You know, Khalil was helping with his grandmother who had cancer. Khalil also had a nice pair of sneakers on.
Right.
Khalil also had a nice car.
Right.
So the reality is now, because we're in such a viral day and age, you know, it used to be you could hide that wealth behind a steel curtain and you couldn't see it. But now you see the cars, you see the shoes, you see people on the boats, you know what Santorini looks like, and you want that. Jamaica wasn't for everybody 20 years ago. Now, everybody going to Jamaica. Miami's for everybody. So that's the reality of it. You get that taste and you're addicted to it. So until we create jobs, until we create wages where people can live a decent life, that's not something that'll change the idea of selling drugs in any neighborhoods, because they sell just as many drugs in wealthy neighborhoods as poor neighborhoods.
Russell, you were going to say something as well? Do you agree?
I agree.
Yeah. I think you guys should all move over here. Well, you already know what it's like to be. I mean, you're from Scarborough.
Yes, I'm from Scarborough.
Shout out Dunlop.
Hey, shout out
Vern
Scarborough.
Block. Hey.
Hello.
And Dominique, I loved your role. You were very sassy. Yes. And you're always trying to fight somebody.
I mean,
always.
Somebody gotta do it.
You know, how difficult do you think it was for your character to stay, you know, I guess like neutral to Seven and Starr's like relationship and their closeness?
I definitely don't think that she was neutral. We spoke about it a lot, I think. And even for me as an actor, I wasn't on set as much as them, so I could come in and feel it, like the brother-sister bond and wanting, and Kenya wanting to actually live in a home like them. So there's one line in the film where she says, you're so lucky you go to that private school, you don't have to deal with hoes like that. Well, that's what she says, right?
But hoes are everywhere.
And that's what
Hodom is universal.
Hodom is
universal.
But she says that.
Somebody tweet that, sorry.
But she says that, and that's her way of saying that if I could be in your shoes, I would do that. That's how I took it.
I love this film, you guys. I really appreciated it. Thank you. Thank you, George. Thank you, Angie, for creating this, you know, immaculate body of work. I think it's really going to set things off in a positive way. At least I hope so.
I hope so.
We all hope so.
And Angie, low key, high key, all of the keys, you're kind of a rapper.
Hey.
No, if you bring me back for the next one. The next one is a battle rapper.
Wait for her next book.
The next one is a battle rapper, so if you bring me back, I'll rap for you.
Girl. I mean, I've been ready. I as soon as I found out that you were a former rapper, it made so much sense to me as to why you were able to just kind of express yourself. I do think that music, and even myself being a musician, like it's one of I think the most difficult things is articulating sound, you know? So sound helps you to articulate how you feel, which I think helped to, you know, create such a beautiful body of work, which is all vulnerability. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm gonna pose some questions to the press. So if anybody wants to raise their hands, I can choose. And this gentleman.
It's a question for Angie. You know, going into the process of making this film, what were you worried about or concerned about in terms of the adaptation?
You know, like one thing as a young adult author you always worry about is the reader saying, well, this wasn't in the book, this wasn't in the movie. That was always in the back of my head. But the big thing was I never wanted this story to be sanitized. And the studio never wanted it to be sanitized. George never wanted it to be sanitized. He wanted it to be raw, authentic. And at first, you know, you have that worry, are they gonna make this real Hollywood? They didn't. They kept it 100% authentic. So for me, early on, those fears were put to ease. Absolutely.
This gentleman right here in the front.
I'm very grateful to TIFF for having this press conference because it gives me the opportunity to look at all of you and say thank you for such an amazingly powerful film. I just saw it a few moments ago, and I'm glad it was at the building down the road, so my tears had time to dry as I walked over. I wanted to ask Amanda in terms of what this experience has been like for you, because I look at this stage and I see that you're surrounded by such fantastic actors with experience and also some really fantastic up-and-comers. And I found this to be a very strong ensemble piece, but your character is very much the glue in this film. I want to know what that experience was like for you, and if there were any sort of pressures you felt with dealing with such a topical subject matter.
Yeah, I mean, of course, going into it, I felt it felt weighty because it felt important, and the book was already so important to me. I knew how much potential the story had to reach people, to put this conversation into a form that is vulnerable and authentic and also more accessible. So that weight was already on my shoulders, and I was nervous going in. I wanted to put my entire heart, mind, body, and soul into it, and so I think we all did that. And I was really blessed to be around such a committed, dynamic, fantastic group of individuals, because anytime that I doubted myself, anytime I came up against a challenge, I could go to Russell, I could go to Regina, I could say, I'm having doubt around this, and they would hand me tools and words of advice and just encourage me and be such a source of strength and a backbone for me. And I think those dynamics started mirroring the story, and the story fed into the dynamics, and it became this kind of beautiful circle of life. And it came to all of us as a community, you know, because we really became a community through the process of making this. Just knowing that we're striving towards this one unified goal, and that we were there to support each other through it. I think a lot of the trials and tribulations we experienced on set reflected the storyline, because at the end of the day, we are, through this film, protesting police brutality. And so, yeah, it felt weighty. I was scared at times, but I was supported and loved, and I'm so grateful for that.
And I think this gentleman right here had his hand up. Oh, she's running for dear life. Come on, girl.
Amanda, I also saw the film this morning, and I can't imagine anyone else playing Starr. I thought you were exceptional in the role. How did it feel, though, that before people had seen the film, that people were questioning whether you should be playing the part, and for reasons of which obviously you have no control?
Yeah, it was challenging. That was one of my concerns going in, knowing that heading into a project that is as weighty as this, that I was already facing a lot of doubt from other people. So that was something that I had to overcome before/while we were filming, and I think that it taught me a lot. It's a really sensitive topic, and it was the first time in my life that I had ever had my blackness questioned, and that was challenging because I had never come up against that before. I always have walked in the world as a black person. I've never thought of myself as not being black enough. That was something that's never something that crossed my mind. So it was the first time that question was raised, and ironically enough, it's something that Starr faces in the film. When she's in her neighborhood, the kids make fun of her. They say, "Oh, you're not black enough," or "You talk like the white kids," or "You listen to indie rock," and those types of things. So there's a parallel between that and my experience being called too light-skinned for the role. And I have a great sensitivity towards the place from which that comes. It's a place of pain. It's a result of people being frustrated because they are navigating a colorist system at all times, and that's painful. And so I understand why that pain exists. But I wouldn't have done this if I didn't think that I was right, ever. I never would have done this. And there was a point in time where I came to the studio, I came to George, and I said, and Angie, Angie, look, if if you agree with these queries and you feel like I don't accurately represent Starr, if you feel like I don't look like her, tell me and I will not do this project. I will drop out, even though it is my favorite book in the world, even though I know that I have lived such a similar experience to her, I can bring a lot of authenticity to it. I won't do it. And she said, what? Yeah. She said, what? You're worried about what? She said, I know that you can bring your authentic self to this, and I've never questioned that you were the wrong person for Starr. Never questioned that you were the right person for Starr. And so, yeah, so we proceeded, and it's been challenging to navigate. I won't lie. It's been hard at times. It's strange when you live in this in-between place, which Starr lives in, where you are not accepted fully by your multiple communities, however those communities manifest. But I think in the midst of it, I'm also learning lessons from Starr on the daily, which is just that just because I'm a multidimensional person does not mean that I need to compromise my voice or step into the world being apologetic.
The colorism conversation is a big one, and it's difficult to navigate, but your role was impeccable. You did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
And you definitely owned it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, it's the girl in the front. Come through.
All right, thank you. And thank you guys for a really good film. I also saw it this morning. And George, this is a question for you, and anyone else, feel free to chime in. But I want to know, what do you hope people take away from Sacani's role? Especially at the end when we see him as a 9-year-old and sort of experiencing all of this, but he's too young to, or he's not given the opportunity to have a voice because of his age. But we see how the hate that's being given and how it affects him as a young child, and it makes him react that way and surprise his entire family in a way, because I don't think that a lot of people realize when we see police brutality how that affects children. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was a conversation early on. Like, I had that in the script development process. It was just looking at the material. You have Tupac, you have the analogy, and I was looking at it, and then it was just like coming to me. I got to put this in behavior terms. You can say the words. You can say THUG, the hate you give. You can say all these things, but how do you visualize it? As a director, you got to put it in behavior and visualization. Me having to talk with the screenwriters, like something that just needs to take it to another level. That's what you do when you go from book to script to actually shooting it. So that conversation went to Angie. Angie, can I just, from the book, just a little bit, can we just change slightly and make that in behavior? Because that wasn't completely in that scene, wasn't in the book. That conversation with Angie, you good with that, Angie?
I wish I wrote it in the book.
Yeah. So once that's happened, that's how it was. It's just instinctive. I could just feel when something is not right. I got to take it to another level. That's what you do as a director, as cast, as actors. How do you take the material and go to another level? So we put that scene in. Once we did it, we only wrote it one time. I saw it. I was like, this is it. Sent it to Angie. She's okay with it. And what I did was, during the process, just for TJ, the Sacani, we shot that deep in the scene. I knew, how do a young kid can visualize that and understand that? So we put that deep in the schedule so TJ can just experience the scenes with the family and the diner, all the relationships. After the Khalil, he was hearing all these things. So that was like the second to last week we did that scene. King came there. That's his first time seeing King. And that's how that came to be, where TJ was able to visualize and feel all that over a period of time. And having a son, myself, you know, they take in everything. They hear, they're very smart. But it was a way for an audience who was not familiar with Tupac or those words, how they be able to visualize and feel it. So that's how that scene came to be, and that's what the representation is in terms of how do young kids take this. And they hear, they see everything. Throughout the movie, you see him watching television, he's taking in his dad, he's taking in these words, and that's how that all came to be.
Okay, and can we get this young lady in the front?
And after this lady, we're going to wrap it up.
Hey, everyone. Is this on? Okay, great. So I'm a filmmaker and an anti-oppression organizer and activist in my city. And my question is for you, George. I've been attending conferences and hearing a lot from like big corporate heads that production companies will only produce films that audiences want to see. And they've deflected from questions like, well, how do you know what audiences want to see if you don't do research, et cetera, et cetera. And so my question is around access. How do BIPOC or Black and Indigenous and people of color get access in the film industry? How do we get our films into the mainstream, and how were your, I guess, films or your pitches received?
Well, I have to think, for this particular situation, it all about IP, which is what is a marketplace, what is already out there that can help for the studio to feel comfortable. I have been in that situation maybe 3 times. First film, Soul Food, that movie got made because Babyface got involved. He had a big soundtrack. Soundtrack got that movie made. The Biggie movie was because Biggie, that's second. Third was this movie because the book was just so great, and it was just building, and we started the script, and we kept waiting because your book dropped like April or May or something like that. February, right? So we started the script, and it was like, but it didn't get on the best. It took a little time to get on the bestseller, right?
It was like the week.
Stop playing with her, George.
All right. Because I know what was happening is we kept saying.
If you don't know, you better ask somebody.
Okay. Because I know we were feeling like we were writing a script, because we kept saying if it hits #1, they're gonna start thinking Greenlight the movie. Okay, and then like a month later, it was getting bigger. It just kept going. There. It just kept growing. That helped the sell. Not only do they like the material, but it helps that the book and the IP got us to move quicker. I mean, it was a 1.5 years. That's a short time in making movies. So it helped with the IP. And I just think as a filmmaker, you just want to find material where it's in your heart, and then where you can be able to have something that you can sell, that you can show. And we're really blessed with this film that Fox gave us the budget to do it. And then they gave us the time, and it allowed us to make the movie that we wanted to make.
Okay, guys, so that's pretty much the end of the questioning. I'm Tika, of course. I'm an artist here from Toronto, and this has been the entire beautiful cast of The Hate U Give, excluding Issa, of course, who could not be here. But thank you guys so much for a powerful, powerful film and a powerful job. And yeah, I think it's really going to move audiences. So you guys did excellent. Thank you. And thank you to TIFF.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.